Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 135 of 2-Minute Talk Tips, the podcast that opens with a practical public speaking tip in the first 2 minutes before getting into a deeper discussion about public speaking. Today's tip comes to us from special guest Maura Sweeney.
Get out and meet and be among your audience before you get on that stage. For me, that has been so key and so critical because I may have a similar message that I am delivering, but what's so important to me is that that message reaches the audience that I am speaking to that day. I could remember being in Macedonia a year or so ago, and it was the one time in a 15 speaking venue trip that I was not afforded the opportunity to meet the people that I'd be speaking to before I got on that stage. And it was the one time I felt like I didn't connect to the degree that I wanted to. By getting out and meeting one-on-one, shaking hands, saying hi, asking a question or two, and making that personal connection means that I, as a speaker, or anyone as a speaker, has made that real connection, not a presumed connection, but an emotional and social connection with the very people in the audience. And when you can do that, the effectiveness, oh my goodness, Bill, the effectiveness rises, I would say, exponentially. Get out there, be with the people rather than presuming you know who they are, what they think, and what their energies and aspirations are like. Go ahead and ask them before you get on stage so you know in advance and you could already respond to that from the get-go.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from Maura Sweeney. Welcome back. Maura Sweeney is the world's ambassador of happiness, who has built a career around speaking as part of traditional corporate roles that she's held and later as an entrepreneur. And we'll get into all of that, including just how one gets the title of ambassador of happiness. The recurring theme in this episode is one of connection. It's all about how you connect with your audience on a personal level and the importance of connecting your message with your stories authentically. Those connections all need to be internally consistent to find success and happiness in public speaking. So now, let's meet Maura. Maura, thank you so much for joining us on 2-Minute Talk Tips this week.
Bill, thanks. I'm really excited to be here with you, and especially on a show like this that's all about talking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an excuse to actually get meta and get into all of that inside stuff that we generally don't talk about.
Exactly.
And of course, you get a couple of speakers together, and we've already been going for like 10, 15 minutes before we even hit the record button here, just about various stuff related to life and speaking and all of that fun stuff.
Right.
So you do a ton of speaking, and what is your earliest memory of speaking or performing in front of a group?
Oh, you are so much like me because I always love asking people about their earliest memory, especially because I know oftentimes it'll point to something significant. My earliest memory of speaking to a group came when I was in 3rd grade. And we had this wonderful school teacher who every year would run a minstrel show. Now, I grew up north, and this was a minstrel show about how blacks used to entertain one another down south. And we absolutely had this wonderful time, jokes and songs and everything. But to make a long story short, out of all the potential roles I could play, I was chosen for my favorite, and that was the narrator of the minstrel show. I was known as Mr., even though I was a Miss, Mr. Interlocutor. And I was this in-between person between what was going on stage and the audience. I would explain things. I would translate things. I was literally the mind in between both worlds. And now look at that to think I was in 3rd grade and my teacher had the awareness to choose me for that role. And when I look at what I do today, Bill, I am the mind that is in between all of society and helps to bring other people together so that one side sees the other and literally that all sides may see what unites us. And so that was a really great opening question, I think, because I'm still playing the role of Mr. Interlocutor today or the narrator of life today, only as Maura Sweeney myself.
Right. Well, what I think is always really interesting about that too is it's not so much the specific role we took as a kid, but how we see that role today. And how that role impacts what we do today in our own perception, how we're able to frame that and get the value from that.
Very good point. And I might even add to it that I'm a far better narrator than I am an actor. I don't even know how to act. And yet the idea of being a mind conveyor or an idea purveyor is what I love. And so when I look back at that original role, I had a lot of material to memorize and I loved it because of the role that I was playing.
So it sounds like you enjoyed the stage from that first role on.
Yes, and yet not necessarily the stage to say, oh, look at me, but more to say, look at us as common people or people that have a lot in common. And I could even look back to my days in corporate life as a manager, and I even used my public speaking role in a similar fashion. I loved being able to use the power of my mind, my voice, the images I could conjure up for myself and others as a means of bringing people into the same mental and emotional and cultural space where a lot of new ideas would be free to flow.
And I think that's what's so important there is you touch on that right at the very beginning of that, and that's that it wasn't about a look at you. It wasn't about you. One of the things I have to remind folks about who talk about being nervous on the stage and talk about dealing with anxiety and stage fright is that it's not about you. It's about your audience and it's about your message and it's about creating that shared community for communication. And it sounds like that's something that you sort of knew intuitively from the beginning.
You know, I guess I did without giving it a name. I don't think I had those words back there, intuition.
well, you had the word interlocutor back then.
Yes,
so that's fantastic. So what are you doing today in that 5 minutes before you get on stage?
My thing before I get on stage is I am out with everybody. That's it. If I don't connect with people that I'll be speaking with, then there's a disconnect, and I'm all about making the connections. I'm all about it, and I'm not a canned speech person. I may have ideas in mind, but unless I could feel the life, the thoughts, let's even say the mental and emotional and even social space that people live in that I'll be speaking with, I feel like I haven't done my best in making the connections on all the levels that I want to. So that's it. I am out there. I am meeting with people. I'm asking some key questions like, what are you looking to get out of today? Or what brought you here today? Or what is your best thought for today?
I've been hearing more and more speakers talk about doing that over the last couple of months as
Really?
Folks going out to engage with the audience and spend that time there to sort of build some relationships with audience members before they start, and it distracts them from their own nerves too.
That could very well be it. And all of the imaginations that they might have. And when you meet people one by one, you realize they're just like you.
So, I mean, how did speaking impact your corporate career when you were in that environment?
Well, interesting. I don't believe that I got my first management job at corporate because I was a great public speaker. At that point, I was in sales. And I remember telling my manager, I don't want to be the manager. I'm too busy trying to figure out how to sell here. But I will say that I discovered over the course of time that my ability as a public speaker to bring people into an intellectual, an emotional, a cultural, collectivized space that uplifts people toward common goals and good thoughts really became a hallmark of my success as a leader at corporate. I will say that I was probably known as a speaker, not just as a teacher, but more as an inspirer for what is better and an aspirer to what is better. But then I would reinforce it on a regular basis, in terms of what I did every day as a manager. So that kind of gets off post. But I would say that my ability to have morning meetings and share with people opportunities to change their mode of thought, to go from, oh, this is so hard, to, oh, I feel so hopeful now, or, gee, I feel like I'm a victim, to, oh, there's such potential and such possibility. That is something I absolutely love to do. So it energized me, but at the same time, it was also energizing the people that I would speak to.
You mentioned reinforcing that over the course of the day or the week. How did you do that?
Well, I mean, think about it. As a manager, it's not like you're always public speaking. It might be, in my case, let's say 2 or 3 times a week when we would have branch meetings or whatever. So let's say that I was having a public meeting and I might be talking about a specific value, maybe one of, let's be great servants of our corporation, of the people that we work with, and also of our clients. And I may make a good case for it as a public speaker, but really, was I going to live that out for the rest of the week, every week, week after week, in a corporate environment? And the answer was yes, meaning I might have been the manager, but I was first to arrive in the morning. I was last to leave at night. I usually would have a quick lunch. And when it came to things like being a servant to others, I always gave everyone respect. And so my words that I would give, let's say, from the position as the manager and as the public speaker in corporate, and the life I led on a daily basis consistently, were always matching up. And I think that combined, it made me even more effective as a public speaker. But my life, as I really lived it, gave a lot of additional power to my words as I would speak them in, public venues at various meetings. Does that make sense? Meaning that my words and my actions on a routine basis were in harmony, and therefore it made it a lot more compelling for people to listen to me, understand me, agree with me, and believe me.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I think what happens often is in a lot of those meetings we've gone to as part of our jobs and part of our roles, we go there and they bring in a speaker, or maybe it's the regional director or VP who talks about all of these values and all of these things we're going to do. And then everybody in the audience rolls their eyes because they've been in that meeting dozens of times before over the months or years. And they're used to, yeah, we're talking about this now, but it's gonna fade away in a week. At one of my organizations, I went to a meeting where they were talking about, let's make sure everybody's time is more valuable. We get the most out of the meetings we go to. So going forward, how about, every meeting we have that's going to be, instead of like starting at 10 and ending at 11, we're going to start all of our meetings at 5 minutes past the hour and commit to ending 10 minutes before the hour. So folks can get caught up, can get their bio breaks, get all of this. And there were probably 100 people in that room. A month later, only one person from that meeting was still using that time schedule. So of course, the audience loses faith in leadership that those changes are going to last.
Very good point. Very good point. Wow. And very true. I think there's a lot of disconnect in the world. And I think that people are realizing more and more that who we say we are as speakers or as leaders, whatever, and what we are need to line up and marry up, because otherwise it's like talking out of two sides of our mouth, and then we lose credibility. And I see that a lot in corporate. I mean, I left my corporate career a long time ago, and then my husband and I, with another company we had, used to sell into a huge corporation. And I will go periodically into corporations and speak. And I see that oftentimes people will promote great values or great plans, but there's a disconnect between what they say they want to do and what actuates. Is that a good word? Actuates?
Sure.
What activates in real life. And I want to go back to the word of authenticity. Why is it that we do so many things and we talk so much, and yet we don't make our words our bond? We'd save a lot of time if we just stopped with the words and thought about how we could make the new changes we want happen by activating them. And I think there's a lot of people in corporate that are so exhausted right now for things like that.
And a lot of them, they mean well.
Yes, absolutely.
You eventually did leave that corporate environment. And so how did you make that transition to full-time speaker and thought leader on the concept of happiness?
Well, let me say this. I have transitioned in my life many times, and that just happened to be one of them. I was ready to leave corporate after I had our daughter. And had I not had our daughter, I probably would have picked a less corporate type position because I'm not, as much as I love working with people, I don't really see myself too much as an inside the box corporate person. But I will tell you that to answer that question, about making the full-time transition is that when our daughter, many years later, was getting ready to go to college and my husband and I had our own business, I remember thinking, you know what? I had thoughts as a young person of really being this, I would say a thought leader, someone whose influence in society in terms of the ideas I had could make a difference. And I remember thinking, all right, well, I'm just going to throw myself out there. And so the first thing that happened is that my husband and I started representing different clients in an entertainment company that we launched. And the client that we first came out with was a preschool teacher, and we became the publishers as well as the publicists for her series of preschool children's books. Now, I'm really, I've been a homeschool mom, but I am not really one whose audience would be that of little kids. But I used my opportunity originally to get out into the world as this publisher of this preschool series. So it put me on TV. It put me in front of moms groups, parents groups, even migrant moms of little kids who were learning English. And so what I did is whatever I had in front of me over the course of time, Bill, I would just use it as an opportunity to come up with a bigger idea that would make people feel uplifted, united, inspired, or whatever. I could actually go backwards and give you a couple of other ways in which I used to use my own ideas and opportunities in front of me to create public speaking opportunities. For one, I was at home for a while and I was doing research for a national women's organization. I was always interested in what was going on in Washington, D.C. and legislation. And before I knew it, I was the state communications coordinator for this national organization, which put me in front of radio shows. And in my case, it was Christian TV interviews. And so what I learned to do in every one of those venues was to take ideas, in this case they were someone else's, but translate them into a manner in which other people could hear those ideas and maybe change the way they were thinking. But I also volunteered at nursing homes where I played instruments, I reminisced with older people, I got them singing. And a third place I went to was twice monthly, I used to go to mentor incarcerated teenage girls so I could have 15, 25 of them in a room. And I would give opportunity to speak and then to interact. So wherever I was, whatever I was doing, it always became like a new opportunity for me to connect with new people, learn from them, but also always bring something inspiring and uplifting. So long answer to a short question, but I've had a lot of experience in life.
Right. And what I think is really interesting about that too is, how you mentioned the idea of, getting out there and sharing ideas and starting out with sharing other people's ideas is that a lot of times what we're doing when we're sharing other people's ideas is it's giving us an opportunity to hone our craft, where we don't have to think as much about the core ideas. Not that we don't have to think about them, but that it's not just our own personal philosophy we're bringing forward and free-forming. We can start with this bank of other ideas and concepts and then figure out, okay, instead of starting from a completely blank sheet, I have this. What do I do with this, and how do I present this effectively to get the result that I want for the other people that I'm working for? And it gives us a chance to hone that and develop that and prepare us for when we go out with our own story to really share.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's very, very true. Because as I look back, I remember thinking, or let's say assessing as I was going along in the process, that I was moving from being this corporate person, speaking a corporate message, and where I could and how I could, inserting my own ideas, to where I am today. And that is, it's my name, it's my ideas, it's my life experience, it's my promoting those thoughts that are uniquely mine. And it has been a transition. And yet all across the years, everywhere I've been, I could say that I was always in front of groups, gaining, leaning, honing, practicing. So maybe when it does come to being nervous in front of a group, I've done it so often that fear is not there. But the messaging of bringing my own messages to the world has also been able to, let's say, shine over the course of time. So yes, I would say that's like one of those developmental or transitional things.
Yeah, absolutely. And those years that you spend talking about other projects and other messages, it's not time that you're wasted. It's not time that's preventing you from doing whatever it is you feel most called to do. It's time you're spent getting ready to do that other stuff, getting ready to share your ultimate message and your ultimate story, and to really, change the world in the way that you want to change the world.
Yeah, very, very true. And I think at this point, I would never tell you I'm perfect. I am so far from perfect. It's ridiculous. I love telling people my strengths are only outweighed by my weaknesses. But I think what's happened over the course of time is, from so much experience of speaking to various forms of groups from every sort of background, I lost the fear of self-consciousness. And it's really about the message. It's really about the bigger idea. And I think that that's something that's come as an offshoot or an effect of all the previous times I've been out there.
That's right. That's right. That's right. So all these previous times that you've been out there, and all these different projects that you've done, the mentoring, you've really got this whole wealth of stories and anecdotes in your background now that you can share with your audience. So how does this storytelling now fit into your current speaking projects?
Well, I want to give you the answer to that. I speak as I am, meaning I'm not really the kind of person that says, "Oh, I've got to just be perfect on stage," or "I have to look like someone else," or "I have to follow someone else's blueprint." I've always lived by the power of stories. When I was small, I would read people's biographies. I'd be moved by worthy stories. Let's say something that was very redemptive. Like other people, I might read an adventure story, an action story, a story that was highly emotional. But always in my life, I was looking for the redemption at the end, meaning, okay, we went through this horrendous thing, but what's the good ending? And so because I always lived in the power of stories, and stories would always inspire me, I naturally tend to share life stories with others. But beyond that, I've always been a person who would look at something and I would ask a question maybe that others wouldn't ask. And I always did that. In fact, if I could go back to my original days in corporate, I got my position at corporate because the man that hired me said to me one day, "You realize, Maura," he said, "I have been interviewing people throughout the country." He said, "And that means hundreds of people." He said, "Out of all the people I've interviewed, there was only one person who asked more questions than you did. And that person was a former Boston investigator." So If there's something in me, even as a child, I would ask the additional questions. I wanted to know why, or I would look at things from a different standpoint. So those are the elements that kind of make me who I am. They spur me on. They inspire me. And so I literally take those things that make me who I am and I export them to my audiences. So I might open up with a question. And then from that open question, start to tell stories or introduce some pictures that get people to think based on those reflective questions in new and, let's say, more creative or expansive or hope-filled ways that open up new pathways of thought. And so for me, it's effective for me. And I will say one more thing about stories. A friend of mine, Trina Latherow, who runs a great website, once said that stories have the ability to take us from one reality to another. And, for some people, they could spew off information, statistics, percentages, increases, decreases, and everything. That is not my thing. But I do know that when I and others hear a story, they insert the details of their own life story into the story. And so when they are following along in a story, and the story ends as something good, as something better, as something more hopeful, as something more inspiring, they can literally come out of that story with a better feel, with more hope. And also, when people hear a story, there's one more thing about it that I think is quite powerful, as opposed to getting a list of 5 points you need to follow in order to be successful in life. The resistance factor tends to go down. And therefore, they internalize the feelings and lower their barriers of, let's say, either disagreement or refusal, because it's only a story. And I think there's a lot of power that comes to that. And then it gives people an opportunity to interpret that story according to their own life and their own perspectives.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable. The idea that you're in your stories, you're actually letting them be an active part of the story instead of a passive recipient of specs and quarterly sales dollars.
Right. Only because it's real for me. I mean, there are some people, they're just born to work with numbers and they love it. And there's an energy in it. For me, the energy comes out of story, because I think oftentimes in life, we lose our sense of creativity that we had maybe as kids, or our sense of promise or possibility. Yet stories bring us back there and help to enlighten and inspire us once again to go there and to get that energy and then to start moving in it.
So you're talking a lot about promoting more of this energy and helping to engage people in this. And so how did you come to be the ambassador of happiness? Is that a presidential appointment?
Isn't it funny? I think it's great. Ambassador of Happiness came about when I actually stopped working as this publisher of books for other people. And I started just launching out on my own. And what I started doing was writing life stories. And my husband and I always loved to travel. I was like this from the time I was young. I had an interest in travel. So over the course of time, I started blogging about meeting people in different places and sharing what made them happy from their insides out, meaning not because society told them to live a certain way, but because they were living out their truth, however that might manifest. And lo and behold, by doing what I loved and continuously doing that, I was introduced to the executive director of the UNESCO Center for Peace. And I met with him in Washington, D.C., and he said to me, "Maura, I'd love to have you speak at the inaugural Nelson Mandela Day celebrations." And I thought, wow, I was born to do this. And so, I mean, every time I think of Nelson Mandela, I never met the guy, but he's always smiling. And I thought he's really a great global sunshine, ray of sunshine for people to say, wow, look at this guy. He went through a hard time, but he came out with a good story. So to make a long story short, they invited a lot of notable people to come speak at this inaugural Nelson Mandela Day celebration. And they said to me in preparing their, I don't want to call it the playbill, but their, what would you call it?
They're building the agenda for the event.
All right. Thank you. The agenda. They said, what's your title? I said, well, I don't work for a corporation. I don't have anybody behind me with deep pockets. I don't have an official title. I just travel and I write about what makes people happy. And they said, we have a title for you. We're going to refer to you as the ambassador of happiness. And I thought, oh, I love it.
That is fantastic.
I love it. And you know what's ironic is that if I could choose my own way when I was growing up, I would have gone to Georgetown's School of Foreign Service because I actually envisioned myself as a foreign diplomat, but a goodwill foreign diplomat. And I thought, well, that wasn't the training that I had or the background I had academically. And yet here I was by doing what I loved, actually getting some unofficial title. And I've since had it trademarked. And now I go to foreign countries. I've been interviewed on radio, TV, press in Europe and elsewhere. And I'm literally introduced as the ambassador of happiness from the United States of America. And I think that's pretty amazing. And so there in and of itself, I have a life story as to how I got there. And I use my life story as a means of inviting people to go back and create their life story.
That is fantastic. And that's also one of those things too, where now it's also just such a fantastic conversation starter.
I guess it is.
You know, once you're listed as the ambassador of happiness, people want to go, wait, what is that?
You know, that's true. Although other people will say, oh my gosh, what does she go out and just tiptoe through tulips? Because it sounds like, oh, she can't be serious. And yet people have also told me, wow, Maura, once you stepped on stage, I'm thinking, I got to take this lady seriously because they know there's a lot of grit behind my words. I just didn't decide to get up one day and say, oh, life is just going to be a bowl of cherries. Oftentimes we get to where we're going because we have to overcome a lot of challenges along the way. And my backstory just happens to be one of which involved being brought up in a fashion that didn't make me happy. And I thought, well, I can't do what I want to do today, but I will choose to grow up as an adult who's happy and living a life that reflects my own value systems and desires. So hence the ambassador of happiness. And I do love it. And I'm thrilled to carry the title. And I should just offer this since we're talking about being public speakers. Last week, I was in Tunisia, which is on the tip of Africa, overlooking the Mediterranean. And I spoke at a women's conference, but I also had traveled a few miles beyond that and was invited to speak at the University of Monastir, which for me was a thrill because I love meeting new people and learning new cultures. But as I was approaching the campus, auditorium, I was saying hi to all of these students along the way. And originally, I wasn't expecting many people were to show up. And all of the students said to me, we're here for you. We're here for you. We heard the ambassador of happiness was in town and we're here for you. We wanted to meet her. And I thought it was so fun and so great for me as the visitor, as well as for them to think, wow, we have the ambassador of happiness from the United States coming to visit us. And I thought it was really great. And if I could come full circle on some of the things we've talked about, prior to my actually delivering my presentation at the university, I had met with a VP. And I said, what are some of the things your students are looking for? And you know what she said to me? She said, so many of them have dreams. And I grew up with plenty of dreams. And wouldn't you know, when I decided to open up my presentation, the opening reflective question I had for everyone was, how many of you grew up having dreams? And everybody in the audience raised their hand. 2 days later, I was at the women's conference and this same vice president from the university happened to come over. I saw her again. She said, Maura, she said, I heard from so many students who told me they ended up having dreams about you after you spoke. So do you see there's power in the story? There's power in ideas that uplift, that encourage, that inspire. And it was just good all the way around.
That is awesome. That is fantastic.
It
And it's amazing how universal these things are, how universal these concerns are. When we talk about what we're doing in the United States, in our cultural context, and, the cultural context existing in Tunisia, which is going to be just so completely different, and cultural context you see around the world, and with an international platform like the Nelson Mandela event. These are themes that are just sort of core to humanity.
Very true. And this is another thing I could go back to when I was very small. I remember the song. It was, Disney plays it a lot. It's a Small World.
Oh, sure.
All these kids and they're wearing their garb from all around the world, but somehow there's a similarity and they're all singing in harmony. I was aware of that at some level as a preschooler. And so here I am so many decades later. And what I do is I bring that universal sense of humanity and harmony really through a lot of different spices and singing around the world. And I'm still at some level that interlocutor that brings together different audiences. And I show everyone, by my very presence, what unites us rather than what divides us. And when we could find some of that common ground, I think we eliminate so much negativity and we clear the pathways for so many new great collaborations, creations, and growth as a society. So, that it's just me being me, but it's a full circle story in terms of what it is that I do for a living and also what it is that I look to influence the greater societies of the world with.
Right. And as part of sort of expanding that influence on the greater world context, you've also then taken this approach to the podcasting space with your own show, Living Happy Inside Out. So why did you start the show?
Well, could we say that I had already been on my own website as a blogger. I had already been on YouTube videos as a YouTube videographer who'd go around the world or wherever I was asking questions and telling stories. And so when I guess the podcast movement started coming along our way, I thought, well, it's another way of sharing my messages and my stories, but through a different context or a different medium. And the neat thing about having a podcast is that in that case, people really can't see your face, but they could hear the tenor and the quality of your voice. And for me, it's a very intimate type way of communicating. But I have a story that even goes with it in terms of how it's helped my public speaking. I don't remember how many podcasts I had released, but I had received contact from an individual in Croatia who was running an event for people from, I believe it was 8 or 9 countries in Southeastern Europe. Actually, they were countries that had been part of the former Yugoslavia before they went into war. And here they were having this public, what was it? It was a leadership and human resources gathering. And they needed someone to bring the happiness advantage. And I thought, well, that's an interesting thing. And I happened to speak with this individual who was looking for someone like myself to be a speaker. And I said, well, what was it about me that made you choose me over someone else? And this is what she said. I listened to a few of your podcasts, and she said there was a genuine kindness in your voice. Now think about that. So I wasn't just conveying messages with words, but there was a secondary feeling that was coming across. And in her case, she used the word kindness. And I think in former war-torn areas of the world where they're really looking to get beyond it, this something in my voice, something in my character came through in those podcasts, but it also really made me happy to know that my words and the energies that come through my words were really touching other people. So that was my podcast story.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's something really powerful about a medium where people are putting in their earbuds and, you know, you're whispering directly into the ears of complete strangers around the world. And nobody's hitting you for doing that.
You're right. You're right. It's so intimate. It is because, when you do a podcast, you're speaking to an audience of one, even if there are millions that at different times are downloading and listening in, but it is that intimate. And the other thing too, I mean, think about this. Sometimes if we look at someone's face, we draw all kinds of conclusions. And as a result of that, we may decide, oh, I can't relate to this person or I can't relate to that person. But when you're in podcast land, you're dealing with ideas. And I love that. And so a lot of the things that may separate people go away and you're much closer to the spirit and the actual story of what that person's trying to convey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what's been the biggest surprise you've had from the show?
Oh, one thing stands out and it just makes me smile. Now, maybe this doesn't apply to other public speakers, but there is one woman that I met that was working, I want to say in Maryland for the governor. She now works in Washington, D.C. I heard from her a while back and she said, Maura, I am so grateful for your podcast. She said, I listen to them on, is it the metro that you drive or that you use when you're in the DC area?
That sounds about right.
She said, I will listen to your podcasts on my way to work, and they always help me to feel better and more inspired and more empowered. And I have to tell you, if something in the messages that I can convey to others help them regain the light and the life and the hope that's within them so that wherever they go, whatever they do, they can change the energy in their part of the world. Oh my goodness. I feel like I'm a world changer. So that for me makes me happy and is a great form of, could I say, satisfaction for my doing the podcasts.
That is fantastic. So if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Well, the best place to go is to my website. It's my name, Maura, M as in Mary, AURA, the number 4 and the letter U.com. Maura for you, because I'm always for you. And they can subscribe to my blog. They can also gain access to my podcast. And if they happen to be regular podcast listeners, which I'm sure they are in your case, I am on iTunes, I'm on Stitcher Radio, I'm on Google Play, and I think you told me before we started this interview that you found me in several other places as well. Oh, Maura Sweeney, Living Happy Inside Out.
Well, fantastic. So, Maura, thank you so much for joining us this week. This has been great.
Bill, I want to thank you for inviting me on, and I also want to thank you for what you are doing for other people who recognize the value of the power of being a positive and inspirational and otherwise public speaker. You know what, Bill? This is too funny. Out of all the things I said, you want to cut that last part out because I couldn't find it.
We used up all the words over the last hour.
I guess we did, but I really do want to thank you for having me on board. I love being able to talk about things like this, and I also love listening to podcasts like this too.
Maura's got a great combination of energy and ambition. And I don't mean ambition in trying to defeat others. I mean it in the sense of driving herself to look for the next opportunity or to be alert to opportunities that happen to present themselves while we're doing other things. So check out Maura's books, podcast, and more. You can find all those links over at 2minutetalktips.com/Maura. Connect with someone in your life by giving them the link, 2minutetalktips.com/Maura. Be sure to subscribe to 2 Minute Talk Tips for free in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.